Okay, well, when I first looked at the proposal for developing the north loop of the river up there, one thing that struck me was that that area up there has some very unique attributes that make it ideal for industrial development. The river is deep there, it's sheltered, doesn't need to be dredged. It has ready access, relatively easy access to rail lines, to the interstate, transportation back and forth. So that really is I think the highest and best use for that area would be industrial. Now, I think a lot of people, when they hear the word industrial, get turned off. They think of pollution, of traffic and noise and things like that. But really, the industry is where the multipliers are. It's where the economic development is. It's where you get the money, the tax revenue, to build a community. It used to be 100 years ago that people lived in very close proximity to industry because that's where they worked, and you had to walk to work. you didn't have cars the way you had now. So it was really only in the 1960s when people started moving to the suburbs and living further away from where they work. But I think some of the more recent research on economic development and revitalization of neighborhoods, they found that industry is not incompatible with revitalizing communities. That actually they ran into problems in California in some areas where they kept rezoning areas to be residential or light commercial. They ran out of tax base. They didn't have any taxpayers to pay to support the residential community that was there. So more recently there's been a refocusing towards when you try to revitalize the neighborhood, make sure that you have a tax base there that's adequate to support that community. And I think that's really key to North Lake Charles. You can't just go in there and say, we're going to revitalize North Lake Charles. Who's going to pay for it? We've sort of been down that road before. If we allow the industrial development is where the economic development takes place. You have what we call the primary sector of the economy, the secondary sector, and the tertiary sector. The tertiary sector is strictly a service sector. It's like grocery stores. About 15 years ago, I had a grocery store chain. They were opening up a new store here, and they called me up. They said, can you do a study for us and tell us how many new jobs we're going to create in Lake Charles? And I said, well, how many are you going to employ? And he said, about 150. I said, well, that's your answer. He said, oh, we thought we'd have a multiplier of 3 or 4. We see this all the time. I said, no. You're not going to increase the number of people here. You're not going to increase the amount of food they eat. So any business that you do, you're going to take away from somebody else. You're not going to stimulate any economic growth. And they were a little offended at that, but that's the reality. Not everybody has a multiplier effect. When you look at the plants out there, Sasol and these other plants, when they come in, they have a multiplier of 6 or 7. For every job that they directly create, they'll create 6 or 7 additional jobs. And they're in what's called the primary sector, because they produce products that are sold out of the area, not locally. So they bring new money into the economy. And they create secondary sector jobs. Secondary sectors those are companies that are serving the primary sector. So if you drive out in Sulphur or around the plants, you'll see that roads are lined with engineering firms and with equipment rental firms and all kinds of other firms that provide services to the primary sector. Those are secondary sectors jobs. And the secondary sector also has a multiplier, not as big as the primary sector, but those companies also employ people who go out and spend their payroll locally and buy in stores and stuff. So, give you one example I've used before is if you take a grocery store and you put it in the middle of West Texas where nobody lives. You go back 5 years later, you're going to find an out-of-business grocery store. If you take a petrochemical plant and employs 2,000 people, and you put it in the middle of West Texas, you go back 5 years later, you're going to find a community of 10,000 people or more, because those employees